My name is Adelanda, and this is Solarpunking, where we discuss solarpunk ideology, things we can do in our communities to make them better, and ways to build the world that we want to live in. So today I wanted to discuss the concept of open journalism or open source journalism, which is a relatively new one. It basically describes journalism where the public plays a major role in a collaborative storytelling process. I think it's a pretty well-regarded fact by now that the field of journalism is in a state of crisis, and it's only getting worse. I recently saw a video somewhere on social media where some person I can't remember said something I definitely can, that garbage propaganda websites and misinformation are free and abundant, and quality, well-researched journalism is usually hidden behind a paywall, making it inaccessible to most people, which is why we are in the rotting propagandistic hellscape we're currently in. But since I can't find that source, here's a clip of Jonah Peretti of BuzzFeed saying something pretty similar.
I'm not anti-subscription. I think subscription is a good business model. Problem is, if you end up with all of the journalism-intensive businesses shifting to subscriptions and putting their content behind a paywall, you end up with only a small minority of the public having access to good information and good journalism. And the majority of the public is getting their news from Facebook and getting it from YouTube and getting it from these social platforms that aren't behind a paywall and don't require subscription. The scale and reach of Facebook and Google is so massive that even if you generate a relatively small amount of revenue per user, it's still much bigger than the subscription revenues of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and every other media company combined. And if the quality of the information on those platforms is not good, and if there's not a business model for journalism on those platforms, you run the risk of having a very poorly informed electorate, the public not being having access to good information, and really high-quality journalism that only a small number of people can see, and that's a problem for democracy. So really what we need is to have models for quality journalism that is not behind a paywall, that is broadly available to the public. The media industry has overcorrected and said, okay, everything needs to be subscription-based and that has to be the business model, and if that's true, that's a real problem for democracy.
And I know that's true because I pay a subscription fee for access to reputable news journals. And the reason why I accepted a subscription model is because I thought the sources behind the wall seemed more credible. The Houston Chronicle, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Coloradan, they all currently require a subscription to access the full news sections. Some journals will allow you to read a few articles before they lock you out, and others only offer certain sections of their website for free, while other sections are locked off. And while I fully support sustainable wages for journalists, this is a real problem. Because unfortunately, we are all experiencing the fall of a relatively young democracy. Democracies are very fragile, and most will eventually fail due to corruption, apathy, or tyranny. And that's because, as Benjamin Franklin recognized with the familiar statement, "A republic if you can keep it," the survival of a free republic depends not just on laws and institutions, but on the virtue, vigilance, and participation of its citizens. And this country was built by stolen people on stolen land and has never bothered to reckon with that original sin and has stomped out any attempts by the people to do so. It was stamped from the beginning, and it kind of sucks that we all have to suffer for this now. The press, unfortunately, played a major role in this. Today, just a handful of corporations own the majority of U.S. newspapers, TV channels, radio stations, and streaming platforms. These networks actively maintain extremely narrow perspectives because their owners share the same corporate interests and editorial priorities. We saw this happening in real time most recently when every news station except the smaller private media networks ran away with Israel's narrative about their occupation in Gaza. We would have no idea what was really going on without sources like Al Jazeera and Democracy Now! And first-hand accounts on social media. We also saw what happened when journalists of color like Mark Lamont Hill, Joy Reid, and Mehdi Hassan refused to toe the line and deceive their viewers in their coverage of the Israeli government's war crimes and the rising civilian death toll. Because they were not willing to comply with the propaganda plan that their corporate overlords wanted to spread, they were fired from their positions. To our benefit, however, they've all done really well since escaping corporate media and building their own platforms. But this isn't new. Historically, American media has always centered white perspectives while marginalizing or stereotyping Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. Check out this clip from CBS explaining how the news media refused to cover civil rights protests until they could sensationalize the violence against the Black protesters.
As a story, the civil rights movement had it all. Good versus evil, drama, social upheaval. But at first, America's major media ignored it, especially in the South.
It was our responsibility to find a way to dramatize the issue.
Congressman John Lewis says that the movement's leaders realized to bring change, they needed to reach white Americans.
How did you do that?
As a movement, we literally put our bodies on the line.
Influence on the civil rights coverage.
Hank Klibanoff co-wrote The Race Beat, a book about the media and the movement.
Well, race was a big story in the South, beginning in the 40s and 50s. It's just that no one knew about it.
Finally, by 1957, major northern newspapers discovered the drama and the story.
How do you feel about integrated passengers?
The television networks followed. Even major southern media paid attention to the open hatred.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
And the violent response to peaceful protest.
If you're going to beat us in the light of day. Beat us while the camera's on.
This was Selma, Alabama, 1965. Among the bloodied, John Lewis.
American people could not stand it. To see young children and old women being knocked down by fire hoses and chased by police dogs.
We will dramatize this whole situation by marching by the thousands.
Television also found Martin Luther King.
The Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. will face the nation.
Americans heard a leader who shattered racial stereotypes.
We feel that the time has come for a full-scale assault on the system of segregation.
This man is someone you could actually talk to and who seemed quite reasonable. And for white Southerners, this was new information.
And part of a national awakening.
It was the media that carried our message to the rest of the nation.
Protest became progress once the media woke up and Americans rose up.
Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Mainstream media has always had an agenda outside of holding power accountable and amplifying the truth for public good. Capitalism and white supremacy ensure that stories of marginalized communities fighting injustice are often ignored, trivialized, or framed through a lens that preserves the status quo. Even that clip just now sanitized what actually happened and made it seem like the media eventually woke up. But too often, news audience are fed narratives and spin rather than verified facts, which polarizes society and undermines trust in the press. And the smaller outlets that have tried to uphold those ideals have been gutted because corporations would rather chase quarterly profits than inform the public. Investigative journalism, which is expensive and time-consuming, is cut back while cheap, fast, attention-grabbing stories are prioritized. And in order for those smaller outlets to survive, the good, informative stuff is locked behind those aforementioned paywalls. So what can we do? How can we make journalism more solarpunk, upholding the ideas of an informed public, equitably highlighting the stories of the people, and valuing cultural impact? Now, I'm not an expert by any means, but I do have a few ideas that could help. First, we absolutely must reground journalism in community. So instead of relying on corporate media, Solarpunk journalism would invest in local, cooperative, or nonprofit newsrooms that are accountable to the communities they serve. This would mean investing in neighborhood reporters, community newsletters, public access podcasts, and other types of citizen-owned platforms. This method would also include a shift towards participatory storytelling, where journalists would work more closely with the people involved when they write a story. You can see this in documentaries where the researchers and investigators will sit down with community members and openly engage with them rather than collecting a few sound bites from the newsreel. This ensures equity in whose voices are heard and that community members help shape coverage, choose priorities, and have direct input in how their stories are told. Second, we can prioritize thoughtful, well-researched, and contextual storytelling over bullshit sound bites for constant engagement. We can treat the arts, culture, food, music, and storytelling not as like lifestyle stuff, but as crucial to understanding community resilience and identity. Thirdly, we can make journalism more sustainable by using renewable infrastructure for publishing and reducing waste. And by this, I don't mean that we can't have print materials, because I actually still buy physical magazines myself, but by ensuring those materials are upcycled and recyclable. We can fund journalism through membership subscriptions, community ownership, or public financing rather than by ad revenue. This would help us break the cycle of media serving advertisers instead of the people. This would also allow journalists to share their research, their archives, and share their reporting as public goods instead of proprietary products. And lastly, we can promote open solarpunk journalism by highlighting grassroots solutions, mutual aid, local resilience, and regenerative practices. This supports a healthily informed public. Journalists have a duty to show how environmental justice and racial justice, labor struggles, and cultural flourishing all connect. And this is the only way to improve our living conditions and advance together as a society. Before I go, I want to share this clip from the Ethical Journalism Network that I think is an excellent starting point for building the foundations for open journalism that follows a Solarpunk framework.
There are about 400 codes of conduct around the world, covering all aspects of journalism. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long. But actually all of them are really focused on 5 key values for journalism. And the first of them is accuracy. I won't say truth, because truth is a very long word. It actually gets us into a discussion about really what is true and what is not true. But accuracy is very important. So therefore the first principle is no deceptive handling of the facts. We work in facts, so fact-based information. Secondly, there's the principle of independence. The work that you do is your own work, but it's not on behalf of anyone else. You're not there to be a spokesman for the government. You're not there to be a representative of a particular business group or a special interest group. You have transparency in what you do, so that when you are speaking and dealing with your audience and producing material, you're acting independently as an independent professional. Thirdly, there is the principle of impartiality. That is to say, you recognize that there's more than one side of a story. And very often there's more than 2 sides of a story. And as a journalist, you're responsible for looking and thinking about what are the other sides of this story. Here is one story that's being told, but what are the other opinions that I need to bring in to make the story whole? And then fourthly, there's the question of humanity. As a journalist, you're expected to show humanity. And what I mean by that is you're expected to be aware of the consequences of what you publish and what you broadcast. So you have to be aware that sometimes the words you use, the pictures you show can do damage. They can be harmful to people. It's not the job of a journalist to do undue harm. It's our job to protect people. And it's very important that when we are in reporting, we don't indulge in hate speech. We don't show obscene images. We don't show unnecessarily explicit images of violence and so on, because we are part of a humanitarian process, and that's what journalism should be. So humanity is a very important part of it. And fifthly is the issue of accountability. It's the one that's probably most difficult for journalists, and that's we're not a humble group. We find it difficult to say sorry and to admit our mistakes, even though we can be lacerating in our criticism of others. But we have to do that. We have to engage with the audience, and we have to correct our mistakes, and we have to be prepared to provide remedies when we get it wrong and do damage. So these principles are pretty straightforward. Accuracy, independence, impartiality, humanity, and accountability. Those are the things that what make journalism different and distinct.
Thanks for listening to the 15th episode of Solarpunking. If you've enjoyed listening in so far, consider sharing this podcast with your friends and family members that you think would also like to join the movement. Also, consider leaving me a comment to let me know what you liked and didn't like. Oh, and if you haven't already, check out the new website at www.solarpunking.com. It's live. If you have excess funds, consider donating to journalists you think are doing good work, because until we get open source journalism, they still gotta eat. Independent media is under attack, and we're going to have to protect the truth tellers in this time of mass misinformation and anti-intellectualism. Without them, we are well and truly cooked. Until next week, stay hydrated and motivated.